Okay guys, we're back. How you doing?
We're fine and you, Prof.
I'm good. We'll just wait a few minutes for others to join. We had one question in the chat room. Can I provide any other measures except time? The whole exercise we just did before we broke had nothing to do with time. It had to do with the percentage of supervisory notes completed. So, although time is important from both the client point of view and from an efficiency point of view, remember, I'll just reiterate, it's just not the only thing we measure. And that's why we categorize measurements into 4 categories. Structural measures, which are environment, context. You know, do we have the staff? Do we have the materials? Do we have the equipment? Do we have all of those things to execute? Outcome measures. You know, how successful have we been at each step and in total as far as the client is concerned? Process measures, which may be a reflection of time but may not, but is, you know, have you completed those tasks within each step? And then, of course, outcome and client experience. Those are all different. They're not necessarily time. I used time yesterday and today, waiting time, just to merely illustrate the whole kind of database approach to management. But there's many things you can measure, as you'll see. Okay? Any other questions? Any other questions that you kind of were mulling on during your break? We're probably going into the last segment, so anything from yesterday or this morning that you'd like me to clarify, this is probably the best time to do it. So of course, remember what we did is, as a use case, and that's kind of what I'm using as being we've used a client-based process. You know, we've kind of followed the client. Now behind the client at the backstage, there's a whole lot of administrative processes. So of course you have to map those administrative processes as well. But bear in mind the same principles apply. Okay, whether you're following a client or whether you're following a document, it's exactly the same. So you would use the same for administrative processes, administrative activities, and the same for client-related activities. So it doesn't change the tools that I'm giving you. Okay, so you can actually practice a client and practice an administrative activity, but you'll find the tools exactly the same. Okay, so before we go into a final repetition basically of a case and highlighting all the stuff again and going into assessment, is there anything that I can clarify ahead of time before we do that, before we start with that? So you're pretty comfortable with the definition of reliability. You should be comfortable with the philosophy of high reliability organizations. Okay? You should be reasonably comfortable with this concept of the reliability management process. And the first step in that process is measurement. Okay? Remember, everything is preceded by being able to process map. So whether you're taking a service line from the point of view of the client, you should be able to map that process, or whether you're taking administrative activity, you know, you should be able to map that process and from there decide. Okay, so if we have to start this thing again, Just to recap, remember it all starts with the process. Okay, it all starts with the process. So we've got, in this process, we have four steps. Each one of these processes has a set of tasks that have to be accomplished. Okay, a set of tasks. So let's take this box, which may be the auxiliary social worker assessment. That's what happens in here. What does this person do? Can anybody give me those lists of tasks? What's the first thing the person will do? What is the first thing this person does? The auxiliary social worker.
She needs to inform the client, to greet the client and inform her who she is.
Okay, so ADET, that's 1. 2.
2, then she completes the identifying particulars of the intake.
So she's comparing the information with what the data capturer filled in. So it's ID verification. Okay, and then they take a history.
No, after they've completed the identifying particulars, if they realize that the client maybe has come to the wrong office, let's say for instance they need application of child support grant, then the social auxiliary worker can right there and then refer the client to SASSA.
Okay, but assume the person came to the right place.
Okay, if the person has come to the right place, after they completed the identifying particulars, then they will refer the client to the social worker to see.
Do they take any other information here? Besides ID verification, they don't take a brief history or anything.
No, they don't take the history.
Okay, so let's say appropriate referral. So this will either be to social worker or other. Okay? So these are 3 things that happen there. The ADET, the ID verification, and the referral. Yeah. Yes? Yeah?
Yeah. The social auxiliary needs to get a smaller history to understand why the person is here.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so ID verification, brief history, and then appropriate referral. Okay? So there are 4 tasks. 1 is ADET. 2 is ID verification. 3 is a brief history. And 4 is referral. Either to the social worker or to SASSA or wherever that is. Is that correct? Have I got this step right?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay.
Also, the opening of the file should be done at that level.
The opening of the file is done where? Here? Or preceding?
Yes, at that level. Yeah. Sorry?
Where's the file open?
If I might come in, the file is not open at the screening level of the client. The file is open at intake level, where it is referred to the supervisor for the supervisor's note. Then the file is going to be open.
Okay, so from the auxiliary social worker, it goes to where?
It goes to the has completed the screening. It goes to the social worker who's completing the intake form.
Intake form. Okay, and then supervisor.
Then it goes to the supervisor.
Right.
And
Okay.
at that point, the file is going to be open.
Okay. So the point is, so we've got to know at each step all of these activities that are happening. We need to have it. Okay? So you have to, if you don't have it, you may have a flow chart but you need to have the tasks in between here, because it is how are each of these tasks performed that give you a sense of just how reliable you are and how efficient and how cost effective you are. Okay, so that's what it is. Map the process, list all of the tasks. Now we want to analyze this. We want to analyze what's happening at this level. Okay? So I've given you already. If you don't have a question, just unmute when you have a question, okay? So what we're doing for a unit of analysis now is I've chosen this auxiliary social worker step to try and do a thorough assessment and analysis of that to see what's happening. Now you're going to be doing everything, okay? But you're going to be using the same approach that I'm using. That's kind of what I've selected one. We've mapped it out. I've taken the one step and I've put all of the tasks in that one step. And now we're making a decision in terms of what do we measure. But we already have some guidance because we know that we get our guidance from these things, the sticks. That gives us the guidance. For this step, we need to measure, is there something from a safety point of view that we have to measure? From a timeliness point of view, efficiency, equity, efficacy, client experience, staff experience. Okay? Now these things are going to fall into 4 categories: structural, outcome, process, and client experience. Okay? We need to measure 4 types of things that are going to fall into these kind of categories. That's what we have to do. Okay, so remember, structural has got to do with environment. It is, people, process, materials, all of those things. What structural measures do you think is important at this level? I mean, as an outsider, for me, I think the training of this auxiliary social worker is important to measure. So that would be an important thing. So you may want to measure the percentage completed. For this case, let's say ADET training. ADET training, a percentage completed. History taking. I'm assuming they get trained in all of this. Okay, so to me that's important. So, but especially now that you're introducing ADET, you might want to assess whether they've been trained in ADET. The outcome measures. What outcome measures would you measure at the end of this step? What is a successful outcome at that step?
It will be the percentage completed screening form, which was successfully percentage successfully completed screening forms.
So when it comes to completion of forms, what is that? A process or outcome?
It is still a process, this one.
Yeah, it is a process. So percentage completed screening forms, good. What would be the outcome? Because what happens here? At the end of it, they referred either to the social worker or to SASA or wherever, isn't it? That's the outcome. Is that the outcome at this step?
Yes, it is.
It is. So what do we want to measure there? Completed referrals. Okay? Percentage completed referrals. That's an outcome. Because at the end of this, the process is the completed screening form. Well, there's a lot of processes there. Okay? The ADET, going through the ADET is a process. Did they acknowledge the client? Did they introduce themselves? Did they explain the duration, explain how long it's going to take, explain what's going to happen? Did they say thank you? Those are process, those are activities. Okay? So you can measure process, completed forms, measure percentage, aided. Okay, those are important screening tools. And then client experience, what are you going to measure? What is a potential client experience measure here?
Prof,
Yes.
before responding to the question, Prof, I just want to make follow-up.
Yeah.
With regard to referral. Is referral really an end result? Is it an outcome?
It's an outcome of this step. It's an outcome of this step, yes.
Okay.
Remember, we are assessing this step at the moment. We're assessing this step. It's not the final outcome. It's not the final outcome. But what happens, what we're doing is we're breaking down and we're assessing each step because we want to, the function that we're assessing and evaluating now is the auxiliary social worker function. That's what we're assessing. How well do they perform their tasks? So we broke the task down and we're measuring how they do that. The final outcome there is that they are referring appropriately. Once they verify, they do the audit, they verify the ID, they do a screening, then they're referring them to the social worker or somewhere else. To me, I'm an outsider, but that's the outcome at this step. Okay? So it's not the outcome of the whole kind of social service consult. It's not the outcome, it's just for this step. Okay, so client experience, what do we want to measure here? It's pretty simple. What are some of the things you measure in client experience?
I think the first one will be aiding.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of it. You know, you can break it down, and one of the most important things from a client experience point of view is the E. Did the auxiliary social worker explain to you what he or she is going to do? And did he or she explain to you what's going to happen? Okay, so that may be the only client experience thing you measure. Because to you, you can measure all, but remember, you're going to be doing a lot of measuring moving forward, so you've got to be very discerning in terms of what you're measuring. So you may want to choose. To me, it's what does the client really want? Okay, acknowledgement, introduction is really important. The rubber hits the road as far as the client is concerned when they're explained to in terms of what's going to happen now and what's going to happen moving forward. Okay, so that's something we may want to measure. So now when you see already, just in this one step, we know exactly what structural measures we're going to make, to measure, what outcome measures, what process measures, and what, okay? Now we've got to figure out, well, what data, where do we get the data and how frequently do we collect it, etc., and then put all of that together, okay? So we can start with the successful training of auxiliary social workers as far as ADEST is concerned. Now that's a structural measure. That data you can pull up, okay? It's going to give you a percentage of people trained in ADEST. You should know that, okay? You want 100%, you may be at 50%. Because at the end of the road, that 50% may explain why the client experience score here is low. Okay, because the client experience, you're actually going to ask the clients, did X, the auxiliary social worker, explain to you what are they going to do? You know, yes or no? Did they explain to you what's going to happen from now? Yes or no? Okay, so if that score is low, it'll correlate to the fact that only 50% have completed their training. Okay, so the structural measures may actually explain a lot of why you're having issues with outcome, process, and client experience. Okay, so you've got to choose that properly. Okay, so one of the process measures that you gave me is the percentage of completed screening forms. Okay, so how do we actually now collect the data for that? So let's assume we're doing this on Friday. How are we collecting the data? What are we going to do? This is a real case. You're going back, and actually Friday you're going to do this. You've chosen this. You've got your metrics. The important process is measuring. Remember, we got no time anyway here. We could put it in, but we're not. We're using other examples. Percentage of completed screening forms. How are we going to go about doing this? Walk me through now. Somebody walk me through. This is Friday. We decided to do it every week.
You're going to get all the screening forms.
Okay.
That was issued during that week.
So we collect screening forms. Good.
Then you're going to
So assume
see how many there.
Let's assume you saw, let's say, 300 clients for that week.
So then you're going to choose a sample of 50.
Okay, random
1 and 500.
Random sample of 50. Good. How will you choose the 50?
Can be randomly just counting and selecting, or you can decide to take every second one or every fifth one.
Exactly. So you can be pretty systematic about it. Say, well, I've got 300. I need 50, so I'm going to take every sixth one. Okay, it's a very systematic approach to random sampling. Okay, so otherwise you can put a file down, flip the coin, head or tail. If it's tail, you throw it away, head you use it. Stuff like that. But the systematic way is, I've got 300, I need 50, I'm going to choose every six. Okay, pull out the six. Good. Now what do we do? So we've got the 50 files here. Okay, there's the 50 files. Now?
You go through the 50 files because you're checking whether they've been completed.
Okay, so you check the file. Check for completeness. Good. And then?
You're going to have that number. You take the number of completed ones and you divide it by the number, the total, which is 50.
Good. Okay, so how many did you find?
Will be the ones completed.
How many have you completed?
So let's say you completed 35.
Okay, so 35. So this equals to 70%. Okay, so excellent. So we got to this point. You already have a sense that 70% are completed. You've got a gap of 30%. You've already got something to work with. Okay, but if you do not take the time to do that on Friday, you're not going to know that, well, it looks like on a week-by-week basis, it's 70%. You may then say, well, I need to get more data. I need a daily data. I need to figure out what's happening. So you can take the 500 and then separate them into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Take a random sample there. That's going to tell you which of the days is the biggest contributor to the 70%. Because you may be able to then correlate that with a specific supervisor. Okay, and remember, we're not here to blame the supervisor. We are here to understand why Supervisor X on Tuesday had great difficulty in completing those notes. What is it that happened? What did we do organizationally to enable this supervisor to submit incomplete notes? Okay, that's the question. So we can take the weekly score. If this is kind of low, you may actually want to go back and separate them into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Take a random sample. So if you've got 300, and you find that they split up into 50, approximately 2 days of 75, and then that will give you 1 and 3 days of 50. You can see how many are you going to pull out here now per day? So Monday and Tuesday you had 75. How many are you going to pull out for Monday?
Each day should be 30.
30. You're going to pull out 30. Oh, good. Okay, so you can do this. You can go on a day, you can go back daily, so it's almost drilling down the 70. On the other hand, you can just persist in doing weekly Fridays for 3 months or 2 months or whatever to give you a sense of what's happening on a weekly basis. Okay, good. So let's assume we're sticking with the weekly thing. We got 70%. Now, what do we do with that? Carry on? So we already have some information, but we've done this every Friday for 3 months. We've done this every Friday for 3 months. Remember, we are now at percentage of completed supervisor notes. Remember, this is process, okay, and this is also an efficiency measure. Okay, so every Friday we got 70 there, and then we're going to have for the next 3 months, give me 11 more averages, give me 11 more, or 10 more, or 11 more. That'll get us to 12, 3 months. Give me 11 more. 70 is week 1. Give me more. Come up with an average. Now we got 70 is week 1. Week 2, we may have 75, we may have 80, we may have 65, 70, 70, 70, 80, and the number goes on. So we're now going to have 12, n equals 12. We're going to have 12 weeks. Each of this represents a percentage of completed forms. That's what it means. Now, what do we do with those 12 numbers? What do we do with those 12 numbers?
We then populate them into the calculator.
Yes, we calculate, and what do we get?
The median and the...
Not median, we get a mean, the average. So let's say here the average is 74%, and then we calculate, what else are we going to get? The standard deviation. Let's assume that's 5. Okay, so what we have here for 3 months is the average completion rate is 74%, which is kind of how we report. Remember, we report measurements as percentages, rates, or ratios, not number of files, okay? So we'll report it as 74 plus minus 5%. So we know the standard deviation is 5. Now what do we do? We plot. Good. We plot. Okay, so what is this? That's the mean. That's 74%, the average. And what do we draw up here and at the bottom? Lower control limit, upper control limit. What is the lower control limit? Calculate this now. 74 is the median. Mean?
The mean plus standard
Minus
deviation.
3
Which is what? 74 minus what?
10.
74 minus
Minus 15.
15.
3 standard deviations is equal to 74 minus 15 is what?
59.
59. Okay, so lower control limit is 59%. Okay, upper control limit is what?
89.
89%. Okay? So now what do we do?
89 plus
No,
15.
no, we have
Plot.
upper control limit.
Plot the percentages.
Plot our numbers.
We plot our numbers. Okay, so remember we got now week 1 to 12. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We got 12 because we assumed 4 weeks a month, and we're kind of doing this gross evaluation at the end of 3 months. Okay, so now we can shrink that to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and do this at the end of the week with 5 days. Or 7 days or whatever. We can do it at the end of 3 months. That's irrelevant because you're following the same process of doing this thing. Okay, so we've got 12 weeks here. We're taking these 12 numbers. Those 12 numbers are the average numbers per week of completion rates. Okay? And we're plotting them at 70, 75, 80, 65, 70, 70, 70, 88, and you will plot them and you join them. And immediately you can kind of see a few things. Okay? So at the end of 3 months, this is what you got. So at the moment, are you happy? Yes or no? Is there anything here? Vic, maybe you want to focus this a bit more. Now this is a real exercise we've done. We've taken, remember the auxiliary social worker, we're assessing that step, and we decided that one of the process measures that's important is completion of completion of supervisory notes. I think that's what we were measuring, isn't it? What did we measure here?
Is the number of ID.
Now, what measurement is this?
Referrals.
It's the referrals.
Yes, bro.
Okay, so these are the percentages we have. What can you interpret from this?
I think what you can interpret is you are happy because there is no number below the lower control limit, and there's also no number plotted above the upper control limit.
Okay, so
Then that's where you will move to sensitivity to operations and look at your graph where it's going extremely up.
okay, good. So you're saying, well, at first, I don't have to do anything immediately here because I got no special cause variation. There's no special cause variation because all of these numbers are within the upper and lower control limits, okay? And then you're saying there are no obvious trends. There are no obvious trends, okay? There's no successive increases or successive decreases that's going to lead us to, kind of try weeks 3 and between weeks 5 have the completion rates drop successively. What can we add back? And you do causation, you want to explain that. Leave, and you had somebody stand in for them. Or is it maybe you have a new supervisor who's not experienced, or what? Can you attribute that successive drop in time to anything specific? That's the purpose of collecting data. And remember, you don't want to measure something that you cannot manage. Okay? If you can manage it, then measure it. Good. So now you're kind of happy in the sense that there's no special cause variation, no obvious trends. Now what do you do? you still got a problem here, isn't it? You still have a problem.
Yes.
What's the problem? The problem is you have a gap. Can you see that? So you have a stable process, but yet you still don't have 100% completion rate. So remember we said measure, assess, and you're assessing whether there's a gap. Okay, you got a gap here of 26%. Okay, so you still have to understand. Remember, what you're doing is you need to get to zero defect. Here, you've got a significant defect that you still need to address. So if you're aspiring for higher reliability, you need to get to 100% completed forms. The other thing you may want to do is benchmark against other organizations. Because remember I said we're human. You know, you're never going to get to 100%, or it's extremely rare or extremely difficult. So the other approach that you may want to take is to benchmark. Now you can benchmark amongst other organizations. So compare apples with apples. So the similar social services offices in similar demographic, geographic areas, what are their completion rates? You know, and hopefully they have it. So they may have, you know, let's say 85%. Then you know you have a gap of 11% if you're benchmarking against them. If you're aspiring to high reliability, you've got a gap of 26% because high reliability is zero defect. Okay? So you're pushing towards getting 100% completion rate. If you're adopting a benchmarking approach, you want to get towards 85%. Or the department nationally will say, you know, we need a completion rate of 90% within 1 week. Then you know that's what you're pushing to meet those compliance requirements. High reliability is almost something that you're aspiring to. Okay? So all that assessment means, if you're aspiring to high reliability, you have a gap between 100% and where you are, because you want zero defect. If you want to benchmark, then the gap is between what your figure is and what the benchmarking organization figure is. If you want to be compliant, you measure this against what the department nationally expects you to achieve. Okay, and that's what you do. So that's the gap. And then the next thing you want to determine is, well, what is driving this? What is causation? Okay? But let's not get to causation now. Are you comfortable with this? This is going to be your bread and butter now in terms of, you know, a reliability management process. You know, we've been through this several times. It should become kind of second nature to you. Okay? Remember, as I said, having a stable process doesn't mean that you are where you are. Okay? You could be reliably bad. So remember throwing darts. You want to get the bull's eye. You want to get the bull's eye regularly. But constantly hitting number 10 means you're reliable. You're reliable, but you're not where you should be. Okay? So it's how do we get from hitting the 10 reliably to hitting the bull's eye reliably. That's kind of what you have to do. That's what this assessment is all about, and then closing that gap. Okay? Any questions about how we got here again? I mean, it's important. It's important, and you need to leave here pretty clear with how we got to this point. Now here we did a process measure. You can do an outcome measure. Okay? Whatever outcome you choose, that may be, you know, so successful or completed referrals at this stage is an outcome measure. Training of staff for ADET is an outcome measure. Okay? You can take waiting time again, which would be a client experience measure. You can do client experience. You can do, well, you know, has the client do they report that they were explained to what's going on? So you can choose whatever you want to measure. We've given you the guidelines. Okay? Safety, timeliness, effectiveness, efficiency, efficacy, client experience, staff experience. That's the kind of things. From those, choose a few structural measures, choose a few process measures, choose a few outcome measures, choose a few client experience measures. Remember, staff experience is extremely important. What I discussed with you the last module, that more important than client experience is staff experience. Because there's a correlation between levels of staff experience and client experience. And that's where your focus, as a manager, your primary focus is on client experience, okay? Or is on staff experience. So you may want, sorry? Go ahead. Was that a question? Was that, did anybody have a question? Was that a question? Any questions up to this point? Any questions? Have they all muted, Vic? Any questions? Does anybody need any clarity with anything? If you have a question, put it in the chat room or unmute and ask the question. Does anybody need any clarity? It's yes or no, so we can move on or not. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, Prof, my delay to respond to the question is that I don't understand. I'm not clear with the formula that we have been using. Because yesterday I had a connection problem.
Yeah.
So I didn't capture it well yesterday.
Which formula?
So I'm kind of
What formula?
Yes, that's my problem.
Which formula, my dear? Which formula? Which formula are you talking about?
The one that we ended now, the client number, the 79%, where did you get there to the 71%? And then, yes, that formula.
Okay, so there's no formula here. This is a measurement. So what we did, okay, just to repeat, what we decided, well, let me go through this again, okay? Okay, let's start again. We map the process. This could be a client-related process, it could be an admin process, or whatever it is, okay? Each of these processes has several tasks that have to be done, okay? Several tasks that have to be done. Now, you can choose, you have to kind of assess all of these because you want to understand what's happening in every service line. So ultimately, you're going to have to do what I'm doing now for one, you're going to have to do it for everything, okay? And the one we chose was the auxiliary social worker. And we said what, right, the auxiliary social worker, the steps that happen there is one, is they do ADET. You know what's ADET, okay? They acknowledge the client, they introduce themselves, they explain how long this is going to take, they explain what's going to happen, and they say thank you, etc. 2, they verify the client's ID. 3, they take a brief history. And 4, they refer appropriately. Okay? So those are the tasks that the auxiliary social worker performs. Now, we have to decide, well, what do we want to measure here? What over here is important to us? Okay, now those things fall into categories. So you can measure them related to client safety, related to timeliness, how long did the client have to wait, okay, or how long did you take to deliver that particular service. It could be related to efficiency. Now, efficiency is more the time that you took. It could be efficacy. It is related to you actually doing this correctly. It related to it could be equitability. Do you do this in the same way? So do you do ADET in exactly the same way for everybody? Or are you discriminating based on whatever criteria you want to discriminate on? That's equitability. Are you using the same respect and acknowledgement, etc., for all people? You're not discriminating based on social background or economics or whatever it is, okay? Now, as a manager, you need to know that. So whether you're going to observe it, you're going to find some way of collecting the data. Now, I don't know in South Africa, but in the US, we actually have cameras all over the place. So we know the level of interaction. Okay? We know that. And we use it. Okay? And then we measure client satisfaction. And then we measure staff satisfaction. Okay? So this is the categories of things we're going to measure here. It may not be everything, but some of those things. Now, these 7 things, to give you more guidance in terms of what you can measure, you can break them up into 4 different types of data. Structural, outcome, process, and client experience. Okay? At this step. Now, structural measures relate to context. They relate to the environment. Do these auxiliary social workers have the means and methods to actually perform their function adequately? Okay? Structural. So you may measure a few things. One is, have they percentage trained in ADET? You may also measure a staff experience component there because it's structural. So percentage of auxiliary social workers rounded on. Percentage rounded on. You remember from the last module I spoke about rounding? Now this means that has this auxiliary social worker been rounded on by the CEO or by their supervisor weekly, as we recommended last module? You have to round amongst your staff. So those are 2 structural measures. Okay? The outcome measure we're measuring here is completed referrals. Percentage completed referrals. In other words, the auxiliary social worker has seen 100 clients in the week. Have they successfully sent them in the direction that they were supposed to? Because that's the outcome at this level. Okay? Process measure, it could be percentage of completed ID verifications. That's a process measure because ID verification is important for us. It also could be completed referral forms. That's different. A completion of a form is different to a successful referral. Okay, remember. And then client experience measures, it may be Well, we are either measuring ADET or we're just measuring the T in ADET. Did the auxiliary social worker explain to you what he or she is doing and what's going to happen? Okay, so that's what we have decided to measure. Now you ask the question of, well, how did we get to that number? So I said, well, okay, let's take one item here. Let's assume the process item where we've got percentage of completed ID verifications. Okay? So what we do is at the end of the week, we pull out all the files that we have for the week. Those may be 300 files. We want to check if this auxiliary social worker has actually verified IDs. Now that may just be by questions that they ask to verify, or by completing the name, ID number, and address. You know, you may use 2 or 3 different things to verify the ID, because we can have Joe Brown, 20 different Joe Browns. ID verification is it the right Joe Brown that lives here and is born on this date, etc., etc. Okay, that's verification. So we're checking those forms, but because we have 300, we can't choose 300, it's too much. We're just going to take 50 of those because we know that 50 will suffice. Okay, we take 50 randomly selected from here, and what we're doing is we're going through those 50 notes. Okay, because we chose 50, that's the denominator, and we're counting off the 50. How many of those 50 have had completed ID information filled in? ID verification means you should have more than 2 or 3 things that identify the person. The name, the date of birth, and the address. Maybe those 3 things. You have to have all 3. So does that form have all 3 or 4 things filled in? What we find is that 35 of the 50 had all 3 things 15. Means that 35 out of 50 is 70%. 70% of clients have been verified from an ID point of view. That's how we got to the 70%. Okay? Now this is week 1. This is week 1. But you got to do this every Friday. Every Friday you're pulling out 50 files, and so you're going to have, every Friday you're going to have a different number here. It may be the same, but it may be slightly different. That's how we got to these 12 numbers, because 12 Fridays, and you kind of wanted to have an assessment, moving to figure out what your graph looking like in real time or after every 3 months or whatever it is. You'll have 12 weeks, that's 3 months. You'll have 12 numbers, percentages. You will then, so your N will be 12. That's the number of weeks. You'll have an average, which is your mean. Might be, say, 72%. Your standard deviation may be 5%. That's how I got to it. That's how we got to it. There's no formula. It's actually measuring. It's counting and measuring and figuring out what proportion of verifications have been done.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Okay. You got it?
Yes, no, thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other questions? Yes.
Prof, how did you find the 70%? I see you have 35 geography.
Okay. Okay, so can somebody explain how we got to 70%? Who's going to explain? How did we get to the 70% here?
Hello, Prof.
Yes, go ahead, explain.
35 divided by 50 times 100%.
Okay. Yeah, so we're converting. There's somebody, just please mute. Please mute. Please mute. Okay. So remember, we want to. Can you guys mute, please? So remember, when we always report measurements in terms of percentages, rates, and ratios. So often, or most of the time, we've got to multiply by 100. It'll give us a percentage. We got to 50 because remember, we only chose 50 files out of 300. We are taking a random sample. We don't have to do all 300. I gave you the sample size. How do you choose a sample size based on the total numbers that you have? I gave you that. Okay? So based on 300, we chose 50. If we had 510, we would have chose 70. Okay? We choose 50. So 50 is the denominator because that's your sample size, is 50. The 35 is the number of files that had completed ID verification, because this is what we are measuring. We're measuring the percent of completed ID verification, which is an important process in what this auxiliary social worker does. What she or he has to do is verify ID. We need to test to see, do they do it or not? We're finding that they do it 30, in the 50 we chose, they did it 35 times. It means that they're doing it 70% of the time. That's how we got to 70. Now we do the same thing every Friday, and that's how we're going to get to n equals 12. So 12 Fridays means we're going to have 12 different numbers here. And then we take the average of those 12 numbers. I assumed it's 72%. And then I assume the standard deviation is 5%. Okay? But it's this is the calculation. Once you have 12 percentages, you put it into that formula, it'll give you the mean and the standard deviation. And then you use that to plot. Mean 72 minus 3 standard deviations gives you lower control limit, plus 3 standard deviations upper control limit. Okay? So that's actually the presentation. So that's how you measure, that's what you measure, this is how you would present it generally. And then, as I said, you have to assess that. Okay? You have to assess that. There's already a lot of data here that helps you to assess it. One is you only completing it 72% of the time. Okay? You are still short. Two is that control chart may show you if there's any special cause variation. Are there any weeks that are actually driving this average up or down, and why? Okay, or are there any trends that we can pick up that will suggest to us that we can investigate something? I told you, this is sensitivity to operations. Is we're getting data regularly so it can point us in directions that things are going wrong. Okay? And are there trends? Are there special cause? That's what we're looking for. And then we're comparing this. As I said, if you're aspiring to high reliability, our room for defect is 0. It means that even 99% is not good enough. We want 99.99964%. That's almost 0. Okay? Between 1 and 3 per million. So if we took out 1 million files, we will only tolerate a maximum of 3 being incomplete. All intents and purposes, 0. Okay? So that's what high reliability is. But assessment, if you're moving towards high reliability, you want 0. You may also want to assess relative to other similar offices and organizations. So what is the ID verification rate amongst other offices of your nature? You know, can you compare to them? What's the gap between you and them? And then the department nationally may have prescribed percentages to you. Say, well, to be classified as compliant, that you have to meet an 80% completion rate as far as ID verification is concerned. Then you know you've got a gap of 8%. To summarize that, you always have a gap there's always room for improvement because the ultimate goal is zero defect. This is a defect, is what we describe as a defect. Okay? Not filling in, not verifying the ID is a defect. Okay? Did you get that?
Yes.
Any other questions about measurement and assessment? So we kind of, remember now this reliability management process, the first thing is measure. We need to know what to measure. Okay, that's determined by one, organizational goals, two, by this acronym, STEEKS. You can figure out from there what to measure. Okay? You then have to map this whole process, and from that you will determine structural outcome process and client experience constructs and choose. I mean, I can't prescribe to you, but you have to make a decision in terms of what's important to you. Okay? But it'll be a mix of these four things. Process, outcome, client experience, and structural. It'll be a mix of that. And then you've got to figure out, well, how you're going to collect the data. If it's timeliness you want to measure and waiting time, well, I mean, if you don't have an electronic system, now we have a fully electronic system. We know when the client has walked in, when they were first captured that they've entered because they have to swipe their driver's license. Okay, when they swipe it, we know the client is in. So that's when the clock will tick. We will know when they get to the reception because the receptionist will also swipe. So the swipe time between here and here is the waiting time for reception. We know that. So we don't have to go and take the time. We just download it and what's the average time between client entry and the receptionist calling them. If you don't have that kind of electronic system, you have to stand there with a clock, with a stopwatch and time. And once again, you can do that randomly. You know the equation now. If you got below 30, you take 30 between, you know that. Okay? So, any questions about measurement and assessment?
Prof, it's just to, I missed something out.
Mm-hmm.
On the sticks, what did you say the S stands for? The sticks. The first S, what is stand for?
Safety. Now it's about so it relates to client safety. So are there any adverse events that can happen while the client is with you? It may also be if you put an intervention in place, did you actually put the client at risk? So you want to measure those kinds of things, yeah. So did the client suffer an adverse event based on your recommendation or your intervention? So did you send back the client to an environment that jeopardized them, put them in danger? You need to know that. We need to measure those things, okay?
And then the T?
T is timeliness. So you can measure time from the time the client arrives till the time the security screening is done. From the time the security screening is done till the time the COVID screening is done. So you can measure the time the client waits. You can also measure the time for those tasks within the step. So the client walks in, from the time that the auxiliary social worker starts with ADET till the time they issue a referral, what's the time? Because what you want to do is actually compress that time as well. That's efficiency. Because the time that each of these steps take dictate the cost of this whole intervention. Okay, and remember what I said is one of the biggest shortcomings in public sector, irrespective of whether it's health or social services, is we don't spend enough time on costing our services. Okay? Because if we cost our services, we'll understand our limitations, given the fact that we all have fixed budgets. But maybe, it's something, I know it's towards the end of the day, but if you remind me in the final module, maybe when we start, what I can do, if you have any interest, I can teach you how to cost a service line. So typically, what would this actually cost the department? That's very important. Because let's assume we arrive at a cost of 400 Rand. Okay? If we have a cost of 400 Rand and we've got a budget of 400,000 per year, it already gives you a sense of how many clients can you actually see a year. Okay? And good management means you're going to have to cap it at that. Or you're going to reduce the cost of 400 if you've got more clients to meet this budget. Reducing the cost means you've got to reduce the time of each of these steps. Because the way we cost services is we cost the time that it takes to deliver the service. Okay? But if you're interested, it's beyond the scope, but if you're interested, it'll take about an hour, and I'll be very happy to teach you that. I can do it now, but I think at the end of the day, it might be exhausting for you. Okay? But just remind me, and I'll be happy to do that. Any questions about measurement and assessment so far? It's important. If I leave, I want you to kind of have a really good understanding about this. How are we doing for time, David?
3:03.
How are you guys doing? Are you guys fit enough? Exhausted?
Yes, bro.
Yes, what? Yes?
Be fine, Prof.
You're fine. Okay. Okay. So we'll continue on. You've got this measurement thing sorted out. Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay? Good. You got the assessment thing sorted. The assessment is very easy. It is, we're comparing what we have to organizations that we benchmark against. Now, what you may find is that you actually are doing this, but nobody else is doing it. So you can't benchmark. And then what you have to actually do is go to the literature. You have to go and find some literature, some study that's done something similar and try and benchmark against them. If you can't even find that, and this is the thing with social services, there's not a lot of work done in terms of management in the social services and data-driven management in the social services. Difficult to find the data. So you may want to benchmark against maybe healthcare, but you're also not going to find the data in South Africa. You're going to have to go to the US because we have all of that data. What is the average wait time, for maybe a psychological consultation, etc. So all of that, what's the average time? So you can get a rough picture of whether you're in the ballpark or not. But remember, this session is about high reliability. High reliability means zero defect. Means you get 100% of everything, okay? You can benchmark if you want and move incrementally, but if you want to move towards high reliability, it's zero defect, okay? It's 100% completion of everything. 100% successful performance of everything. For every 1,000,000 clients, will allow you to fail a few times. That's what it means. Okay, so you lost me there for a minute or so. Am I back?
Yes.
Okay, good. So there was an issue with the battery of the camera. Anyway, so remember measurement? So I was on the assessment side. You're assessing, you're essentially comparing and looking for a gap. You're looking for a gap when it comes to high reliability, zero. You don't want any gap. If you're benchmarking against similar organizations, there may well be a gap. Or if you're targeting compliance with the national department, then of course you may want to meet their metrics. Okay, so that's the assessment part. It all starts with collecting the data. So after the assessment, if you've identified gaps, and in these cases that we have done, there are clearly gaps because we're getting 72% averages, so we want to get to 100%. We've got to figure out, well, you know, what's kind of causing that. So we've got to figure out what's the causation. How do we figure out, well, what's driving this? Okay? Now, I'll tell you, generally, these kinds of activities are not done individually. So you're not going to do them alone. You're going to actually have to set up a team within your organization that comprises maybe 4 to 6 people, and that team will be tasked with reliability management. They're collecting the data, you know, doing the research and benchmarking and figuring out what the gaps are, working through potential causation and how you can improve that. Okay, so this is not an individual activity. It's going to require a team, and the more that the team engages in this activity, the better they become at it, the quicker they're able to do it, and then you can kind of scale this to different service lines, etc. So very important. What I'm going to close with is actually pretty basic stuff. You may have actually covered a lot of this in other aspects, but essentially causation is trying to understand, well, root cause. Okay, so a couple of things you need to know, and this is from high reliability organizations. Remember, one of the characteristics is they do not accept simplistic explanations. Okay? They do not accept simplistic explanations. We need to understand, well, we don't blame, we do not accept simplistic explanations. We need to understand all of the things that contributed to the supervisor not completing the notes, or the auxiliary social worker not adequately verifying IDs. We need to kind of understand why that is happening. Noting, of course, that, you know, if you have a catastrophe, it's usually an accumulation of different things. Why is it possible that in one of your interventions you sent the client back home and the client ended up losing their lives? Okay? You can't explain that away in a half-an-hour meeting. It requires a lot of, you know, investigation to understand the multiple things that would have led to this. Okay? So understanding causation is extremely important. Remember that in almost every defect, there are multiple contributors. Okay? There are multiple contributors. No one is to blame. Okay? The whole point of trying to get to causation is not to figure out whose fault it is, but it's used to actually put an intervention in place to solve the problem. Okay? So bear that in mind. Are you familiar with the Swiss cheese model? Do you know what the Swiss cheese model is? Do you know what the Swiss cheese model is? Have you heard of it? No, you haven't heard about that.
No.
So Swiss cheese is the cheese with holes. Have you been to Pick n Pay or Woolworths and you see when they slice the cheese, there's holes in it? Have you seen that cheese? A cheese with a, yeah, that's called Swiss cheese. Yeah, Swiss cheese has got holes, okay? Now the Swiss cheese model, it basically says that the only way, so if you look at these slices of cheese, okay, the holes are there. The only way that something can go through is for all these holes to line up. Okay? Now, when we refer to the Swiss cheese model, this is what we mean. So if you look at the Tenerife accident yesterday, there were several things that happened at the same time. From the bomb explosion in the one airport to poor weather, captains refueling, the captain coming out of the simulator, passengers getting off, all of those things happened at the same time that resulted in this major catastrophe. So the Swiss cheese model says exactly the same thing. Is all of these holes have to line up for a problem to go through. Okay, if this is the disaster, it would have started very early on. Okay, and successive things happened that enable this problem to perpetuate itself. Okay, that's the Swiss cheese model. So when you're looking for causation, you're looking for all the things that would have happened in that process that if done differently or if done correctly, would have avoided the end result. Okay? So you can see here, if you put in, if you block one of these holes, or you put in a slice of cheese that's got a hole somewhere else and not aligned, this problem would not perpetuate. The holes don't align. So when you have multiple things coming together to result in a disaster, the implication is that it only takes one thing to stop that disaster from being perpetuated. Okay, so just changing that one slice means those holes are not aligned anymore, and something that starts there cannot happen, cannot result in the disaster. So if you look at the case that I gave you earlier on, and I said, well, in medicine, one of the commonest things that happen is and could be fatal, is if patients receive the wrong injection. Okay? Now, for patients to receive the wrong injection, a whole lot of things will happen. One, the doctor may write ineligibly. You can't read the prescription. Okay? Two, that the nurse who takes the prescription to the pharmacy doesn't check it. The pharmacist doesn't check, whether the dosage is right, whether it's appropriate for this person, if this person is a child. The person collecting it doesn't check. The person administering it doesn't check. So all of those things have to happen for a patient to receive the incorrect injection and then maybe die from it. Now, just one of those things would have saved that patient's life. Okay? So that's that Swiss cheese model. And when you're doing causation, what you're ultimately looking at is all of those things that happen throughout, and how can you create blockages to ensure that these problems don't perpetuate themselves. Okay, that's kind of just one of the principles. Okay, so remember that's important in causation. So some of the tools, remember, you would do in teams. So one of the tools you actually would use is brainstorming. Okay, so for the 4 or 6 of you in charge of this, you brainstorm basically everything. You brainstorm determining what are the measurement criteria, how do you assess, against what do you benchmark, you brainstorm what's causation, you brainstorm solutions, you brainstorm implementation strategies. Brainstorming is a key tool in this reliability management process. And as I said, it is not an easy exercise to brainstorm. You have to develop the skill, you have to develop that expertise if you're going to get the outcome from a brainstorming exercise. So that's one of the tools. I'm not going to go into it. It's maybe something we can cover in the final module, but it's a special skill set, brainstorming, because you're actually going to be brainstorming everything that we actually taught you about from yesterday to today. Okay? How do you arrive at a decision of what to measure? You're going to arrive at that by brainstorming within this team. Okay? Another approach that you can use is called the Fishbone Diagram. Okay, I'm not going to go through that because that's pretty common. You should actually know what the Fishbone Diagram, it's the scientific term for that is the Ishikawa diagram. And essentially what it does is it says, well, this is the outcome. Maybe that's the incomplete ID verification. What's contributed to that? Okay? You know, what are the different things? Is it related to the individual? Is it related to the materials, systems, processes, policies, etc.? And then what contributes to that? Okay, so understanding how to use a fishbone diagram is extremely important because, and once again, that's another thing that's brainstorm. So the group of 4 to 6 actually sit and figure out, you know, what are the contributing causes. This is going to result in many contributing causes. So, and this is what happens even when they investigate aircraft accidents. It's not one person, it's a team that's doing it. And they use brainstorming and they use fishbone diagrams to figure out, is this man? Is it related to the machine? Is it related to software? Is it related? And then they kind of figure out, well, okay, what relating to man would have contributed to this? Sorry, was that a question? Please mute. Okay, so that's the fishbone diagram. You have to learn how to use that. You can practice, that's pretty common knowledge. And then thirdly is they use the 5 whys. Did you hear about the 5 whys? Do you know how to use the 5 whys?
No.
So 5 whys is a tool to get to root cause. Okay? And that's exactly what we want to do when we're doing causation. We want to know what is the root cause that resulted in this. So what we have to do is ask the question, you know, like a child basically. Why? Every time you answer, you ask why, and why, and why, and why, and why, until you get to some kind of reason. Okay? So, you know, let's assume you're doing the fishbone let me give you an example. Let's say a practical example. If you need a piece of equipment, say whatever equipment that is, that's pretty crucial or vital, okay? So you ask the question, so let's assume that you have these scanners, the security scanners for clients when they come in as a security measure, okay? You know, you have to you know the stuff you have at the airport? A lot of public departments have that now, where you have to walk through, picks up any metals or whatever it is, okay? So let's assume that is broken. Now that's you know, it has a major impact on your security screening if that's broken, okay? So you ask, well, why did that break? And the question may be, well, you know, one of the paths or one of the connections broke. Now, that's a superficial explanation. We know the connection broke, but we want to know. So you ask why again. Why did the connection break? Okay, and the answer to that may be, well, there was a cheap replacement put in. So you ask, why was there a cheap replacement put in? And the answer was because we only budgeted for the cheaper one. And why did you only budget for the cheaper one? Because the person drawing up the budget has got no experience in terms of maintenance. Okay? Why does that person have no experience? Well, they may have been a junior hire or were not adequately trained. So the reason that the security machine breaks is not because of the part. The root cause of that is the person who's actually responsible for the budget their lack of experience pertaining to equipment maintenance, that's the reason. Because what's going to happen if you just fix the valve, they put back a cheaper valve, it's going to break again. Okay? So that's root cause, is you ask why at least 5 times to get to the actual root. Because you can change these parts as many times, it's going to continue to break. But you take the guy who's drawing up the budget and you put him through a training program about maintenance and budgeting for maintenance, he'll come back and you'll get the right part and you won't have the problem again. Okay? That's root cause analysis using 5 whys. Do we have a question?
Someone asked if you can please include these techniques in the slides you will be providing.
Okay, yeah, I'll include them. So that's an example of 5 whys. So brainstorming is critical. Brainstorming is a kind of scientific approach to doing it. Okay, Fishbone is another one. 5 whys. And essentially, the only 3 tools you need to understand causation are these 3 things. Okay? Keep it simple. Develop expertise in these 3 and you're adequately equipped to implement this whole reliability management process. Okay? Any questions about how you would get to causation? So in this case, the causation the issue we may be forced to deal with is the low percentage of completed ID verifications, or what's driving the low completion rates of supervisory notes, or what's driving the increased wait times for security. Whatever you choose, we need to then go back and understand what's happening. Okay? That's what a quantitative approach to management is. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Does this also, I'm trying to think this through now. Let's say, for instance, the social workers are already doing the ID verifications, etc. And with the 74%, would you also be able, in your committee of 4 to 6, to co-opt someone from that section to come and assist with the brainstorming?
Absolutely.
Actually, the experts in the field.
What do you call that? Deference to expertise. Exactly. Yes, exactly. That's it. Because the person best equipped to tell you why they're not completing is actually the auxiliary social worker. That's right. That's a really good point. So you include, remember the principles, deference to expertise. So you're going to write these 6 things down and put it on your wall. And everything you do, you ask yourself, have I addressed this? Have I addressed that? So exactly, yes. You should have. And based on that, you can see that you may have a core, but always co-opt people depending on the problem that you're solving. It doesn't mean you change the 4 to 6, but you bring in people as you would need. And my experience, the best is to have a core group of people, call them your reliability management team. And they will develop this expertise pretty quickly. They will co-opt. That's the way to do it. And define every process. Start with the commonest processes. Break them down. Map it. Value stream it. Identify the tasks. And then start assessing. Okay? And improving each one. You're not going to become an HRO overnight, but you got to start somewhere, and I think you'll find that improvement. And that's infectious. I think the more you do this, it becomes actually infectious. And believe me, you will actually enjoy this quantitative aspect of management, because this is real management. It's real management. It's data-driven management. It's the way you should be doing it in the first place. Okay? Any questions? I'm going to stop there for the day. I think it's a lot of information in this module. But I'm happy to reinforce anything for you.
Mine is a comment of...
Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
Something that has stuck with me throughout the day is what you said before lunch earlier this morning. that if you do not have capacity to address an issue, do not waste time analyzing it.
Yes.
And I think the colleague also mentioned something like that yesterday.
Yeah.
Going about in circles exhausts staff quite
Yes.
a lot.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
they realize that they are the experts in a way.
Yeah.
They know what are the challenges that, should I say, management needs to address. They keep coming to the brainstorming. They give you the real issues of why things are the way they are.
Yeah.
But because either finance or whatever other capacity challenge that there is, the issue keeps on going on, despite the fact that everybody top to bottom knows the real cause.
Yeah.
So that is something that is an issue, I guess, in public service.
Right. Yeah, I know there's a lot of stuff that's beyond you, and the term I used is measure what you can manage. Okay? Measure what you can manage. So if you're going to invest time and energy in this, do something that you can actually change. And fortunately, a lot of operational stuff and process stuff is something you can change. Okay? So, if you have too many clients, may not be an issue of overload. It just may be inefficient process that if you're able to optimize the process and client flow, that you'll be able to cope with that. Okay, so yeah, don't waste your time, in trying to resolve issues that are beyond your control. Okay? Any other questions? I'm kind of done as far as the content is concerned. So if you have any issues, I'll address them.
Hello, Prof.
Hi.
Prof.
Yes. Go ahead.
I'm just checking the previous videos. Where can we get them? 4 and 5 and others.
They are all up on the learning management system. You should have a username and password. We sent that out several times. In fact, I sent it out about 2 weeks ago. There's a username and a password that you got. You put that in. We give you a link. You put your username and password on. Check your emails. You'll receive it. All the videos are there. And this video will be up as well pretty soon. I think, Vic, when will this be ready?
As soon as
Will be an upload. Yeah. We sent it out. We sent it out to your provincial leads. I can send it out to them again and they'll send it out to you. So all the videos are there for all the modules. All the videos, all the readings. Sorry? Yeah.
But we will check with them again.
Yes. You should have it. You should have it. Everything is available. This video for this module will be available by the end of the week.
Prof, when I went on to the learning site, module 5, the videos weren't there, but I'll check again.
Check again, they should all be up. I will also take a look. As far as I know, none of the videos are missing. Module 5 was my managing the client experience.
Yes.
It should be posted. It should be posted. Just check again. Let me know. Shoot me an email. By the way, I'll give you my email address again if you need to contact me. Okay, it's rpillay @uab.edu. Oh, I'm writing still. uab.edu. Okay, so check that. I will remind your provincial leads that they need to send out the links again to you. It's not a link, it's a link to the platform, and then it's the standardized username and password. So everybody uses the same. Okay? UAB.
So,
UAB.edu. I think Vic has put it up in the chat. Vic has put it up in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions? I hope it's coming together for you.
It is, Prof. We
Good.
must just practice it at work.
You got to practice it. You got to practice it. And if some of you in this are working together, feel free to just do simulations first. You know, like what I did now, they're not real cases, they're simulations. We drew up the process, we put superficial numbers, we did the calculations. It's a simulated exercise. So practice with that. And then take an easy thing first. That easy thing that you can measure. And that's why I use time, because it's easy to measure. Okay, if you don't have a lot of client files, you know, if it's 20, 30, choose something you want to measure, pull them all out and go through it. So it's the only way we're going to get this right and improve what we're doing. That's it, you know, full stop. That's what reliability means. You know, this is all about quantitative, it's all about data. But real management is all about data. Okay? Any other questions? Okay, if you have no more questions, I will see you in about a month's time. We're probably targeting the first week of July for your final module, but I'll share the date with you in the next week or so. Okay? So you guys take care. I hope you enjoyed the model. I hope you have learned something, and we'll see you soon. I will post some PowerPoints for you, essentially a lot of what I've written in PowerPoint form.
Thank you, Brad.
Okay.
Thank you, Prof.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.